Did you know that Gary Gygax, co-creator of Dungeons & Dragons, once wrote this ridiculously titled article, How to Set Up Your Dungeons & Dragons Campaign and Be Stuck Refereeing It 7 days a week until the wee hours of the morning. He wrote this as a tutorial for world building back in 1975 when D&D was a new game and it was only a rule set. There weren't any of these adventure modules yet, let alone an official campaign setting to run adventures in. So every game master needed to build their own fantasy world for their players to explore. Today, there are countless books and videos about world building for various role-playing games, but this first article about it from Gygax himself breaks down world building into 5 simple steps, and I've been using these steps to build a world for my next campaign, so I want to share them with you. Because I'm Bob, this is where we learn how to have more fun playing RPGs together, and this is the Gygax 75 Challenge by game designer Ray Otis, who transcribed the original article, which is available but not very easy to read, and turned it into this free PDF. Link in the description. But Otis also turned each of Gygax's 5 original steps into more actionable checklists, with the goal of completing 1 checklist per week and gradually building your own RPG world over the course of a month. Personally, one of my biggest obstacles as a GM and as a creator in general is getting caught in the details and doubting what I want to make or write before I ever write it down. So my intention with the Gygax 75 method was to speedrun build this world with just 1 or 2 days per step. And I actually got about halfway done before the holidays took over my schedule, and then the OGL wars began. So do what makes sense for you, but don't let yourself get bogged down in the details. You can write your world's entire history later. Here's step 1, according to Gygax.
Are we good, Bob? Step 1 is something you do in your head. Now, fantasy, swords, and sorcery games need not have any fixed basis for the assumptions made by its referee. My own doesn't, except those which embrace the whole of fantasy.
So mixing and mashing different subgenres of fantasy was Gygax's style, and this approach is fun because it keeps the players guessing. But he takes that sentiment a little too far, in my opinion.
Regardless for what setting you up, keep it secret from your players, or else they can study your sources and become immediately too knowledgeable.
Whereas, I think if you want your players to embrace your campaign world, you should not only share what books, movies, and games inspired you, but you should even let them in on the process. Letting them add to their character's hometown or a faction they're part of is a good way to get your players invested in the world, rather than only their one character. Gygax mentions some common inspirational material like Tolkien's Middle-earth and Norse mythology, and then he drops this awesome advice. Settings based upon the limits, if one can speak of fantasy limits, can be very interesting in themselves, providing the scope of the setting will allow the players relative free rein to their imaginations. And that's really the whole job of the Game Master, deciding the rules and setting the parameters and baseline expectations of your campaign, then letting the players play around in it. So while Gygax says to create this concept in your head, I agree with Otis's first task. Get/create a notebook so you can write this all down. Then develop your pitch of 3 to 7 well-crafted bullet points that will both communicate and sell the world to your players. Now in my case, I'm just trying to build a pretty basic low-ish fantasy world for Dungeon Crawl Classics with inspiration from Tolkien, folklore, Legend of Zelda, and Skyrim. So here's the first half of my pitch. The world is wide and old. The dungeons are deep and older. Both contain valuable treasures and magical secrets coveted by men and defended by monsters. Your world is small and dangerous. Humans, dwarves, and halflings and elves live in small, isolated settlements. And wolves, spiders, giant rats, bandits, goblins, orcs, beastmen, vampires, dark mages, living dead, dragons, demons, and all manner of strange monsters lurk just over the hill or across the river or beyond the pines. Only fools, and well-armed fools at that, ever wander more than a few miles outside a village, and only the kings of fools meddle with magic. It continues on why you, the player, are in fact driven to explore this dangerous world, and ends by mentioning an overarching theme of law versus chaos. Honestly, mine is kinda too long, but I wrote it to read aloud to my players at the start of our campaign, rather than to get their buy-in beforehand, because We've already talked about these basic ideas, and fortunately, they're pretty much down for anything. For comparison, here's Otis's example. Player characters are human. Iron tools are relatively new and are antithetical to magic. There are only 2 classes, mages, and books dropping off my lap, mages and fighters. Powers of chaos and law war over the fate of humanity. He expands on those points as well, but I really like how he leads each bullet with the key information to help potential players decide if they want to play and get ideas for their characters. Then, Otis's final task for step 1 is to list out all of your sources of inspiration with a couple sentences explaining what your world takes from those worlds. This is very smart because it gives you a font of inspiration to return to throughout this project and later on during your campaign. So let me know in the comments below, what settings, fantasy or otherwise, do you find most inspiring when building your own worlds? Are you typically inspired by books, movies, video games?
Or perhaps by reading some great setting books like from our sponsor, Grimhollow. It's Grimhollow, right? Valakan Clans, a 5e compatible setting for the frozen reaches of your campaign. With details on the Valakan clans, character creation with background options, new subclasses for each 5e class, new feats and martial maneuvers.
Crap. Original thematic monsters, detailed NPCs, quest ideas, and new mechanics for exploration and for running large battles like Viking raids. And to make good use of those raiding mechanics, there's a second book with a 5e compatible adventure that spans a full year in-game where your party leads attacks for a new clan and defends against raiding monsters. Plus, it has 12 standalone dungeons to use however you want, which is going to come in handy later in this video. So check out Grimhollow Valakan Clans through the link below so they know who sent you. But now, grab your pencils.
Now, step 2 requires sitting down with a large piece of hex-ruled paper and drawing a large-scale map. A map with a scale of 1 hex equals 1 mile, or 2 kilometers for those of you who go with more recent faddish modes of measure. Yes, I often use...
Okay, Gary literally used parentheses in parentheses just to explain how quirky he is.
Even such small things as a witch's hut or side entrances to the dungeon can be shown on the map. The central features of the map must be the major town and the dungeon entrance.
Bingo. Actionable world-building advice. And think about this. It's so incredibly different from how many of us have been conditioned to think of world building today. We're not building an entire world. We're building one small area with a town, a dungeon, and a few points of interest for quests. You only need a few things, and Otis breaks it down. 1 large settlement, define large however you like, 2 other settlements, camps, larger or smaller towns, a keep, the home base of a fantasy race, etc. 1 major terrain feature covering at least 3 hexes, 1 mysterious site for exploration, 1 dungeon entrance at least. He goes on, like Gary, to talk about the scale of your map, but I skip this part. I'll probably add a scale soon, but distance and travel time between points are definitely the kinds of details that would have slowed me down if I let them. I just want to throw these features on a map with relative distances and then add more cool stuff. Look at this hand-drawn map from my first D&D campaign. It includes a bunch of tiny sketches of places my GM created at the start, and more places that we discovered and added to the map over the course of our game. So I really loved Gygax's instructions on drawing that witch's hut or the dungeon entrance. Showing those features on a map will draw your players to them. However, reading the rest of Gygax's step 2, it's not completely clear whether he thinks the players should ever see this map, or if it's for the DM's eyes only. Based on his preference of not even telling the players what settings inspired you, my guess is no, but again, my recommendation is to absolutely give your players a copy of this map so they can draw all over it. That's a tangible way to get them invested in the world. So my first draft of my map is pretty rudimentary, but it checks all the boxes. I have a small city in the mountains, a large town near the coast, a large mysterious forest, a smaller but more mysterious swamp, and a river. Also, because I'm going for this Skyrim Zelda vibe, I decided to put a single meandering road between the city and the town, and then along that road, there's a couple villages, shrines, towers, forts, other land features, and of course, the big dungeon. Like I hinted at earlier, mapping was one of the things that drew me. no pun intended, into running the game, so I will definitely be redrawing this map with more evocative images and names for everything. Though I'm also intentionally leaving big sections of it without features, because I want to randomly generate a bunch of them as my players explore, so we get to discover this world together. Along those lines, Otis recommends creating a random encounter table at this step, and I think that's a fantastic idea for any group that enjoys role-playing overland travel. You still want these random encounters to be themed appropriately for the region, and you can make more specific tables for your forest, or your mountains, or your city, and so on. Definitely one of those things that I can very easily get bogged down in. Before I found this PDF, I spent a wild amount of my free time making a huge random encounter matrix based on the prevalence of different types of locations and monsters in Skyrim, and like any proper Game Master project, it'll probably never see the light of day. So I seriously need to simplify it, but let me know in the comments if that sounds like a cool video to you, or just a video about different ways to design random encounters for your campaign. Now, step 3 is to create the dungeon, and as Gary is quick to point out, this step
is very difficult and time-consuming.
And he's right, too. Dungeon design is a whole different beast from world building in my mind, so I completely skipped this step for now. Obviously, my world will have a dungeon, probably many dungeons, but for a lot of them, I will probably use dungeons from books that I already have, either wholesale or editing them to make sense for this world. The general idea for these old school games that Gygax is writing about is to have a central dungeon with many levels, many passages between levels, many entrances, and many different themes and groups of inhabitants with their own unique treasure and traps and unusual elements. It's really supposed to feel like its own living world, this underworld that is separate from the world above. For that reason, I think Gygax dungeon building is probably worth its own video in the future, so we're going to move right on to step 4, the town.
Here, your players will find lodgings, buy equipment, hire mercenaries, seek magical and clerical aid, drink, gamble, and wench.
Okay, Gary, let's settle down there. Similar to the main dungeon, the main town can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. Something I discovered years ago building my first setting. All an RPG town really needs is an inn where the characters can sleep with an innkeeper who can provide them with quest hooks. From there, we can add layers. If the inn is also a tavern, it's a better environment for role-playing with other townsfolk and other travelers. Merchants, artisans, other adventurers, priests, or thieves, and then any NPC that the party takes interest in can get their own location. The blacksmith shop, the temple, that secret thieves guild. Gygax's suggestions are based on people. The Thieves Guild, a society of evil clerics, a brotherhood of lawful men, honest and dishonest merchants should be indicated. Taverns which drug patrons. Anyway, Otis recommends starting with a town map, and I skip that step because, once again, knowing the exact distances between locations in the town doesn't feel like a priority to me, but I really loved Otis's second idea. Look at the equipment list for your game and name several shops where various kinds of items can be bought. That's so intuitive. I appreciated that it also helped me get more familiar with the equipment list for Dungeon Crawl Classics, because this is going to be my first actual campaign using this system. And he gave another great tip that you've probably heard before: when in doubt, name a place after the owner. These are really smart bullet points because these items are objectively interesting. A place where the characters could lose all their money is definitely a place your players will remember and want to revisit at some point. A secretive guild hall and its reputation could easily spiral into its own line of quests, and a religious center and the gods to which it is devoted gets you thinking about the primary or at least local deities of your setting. Then Otis suggests creating 5 NPCs in the town, each with a distinguishing trait, a need for something, and an agenda. Really great tips, just packed into this step. So if you're finding this video helpful, remember to give it a thumbs up. But overall, these good ideas will organically start to flesh out the wider world beyond this one town. And that wider world is step 5. Gygax says it's something that you won't immediately have to worry about, but is a good idea to have a general plan in mind immediately. So stuff like the continent, the planes of existence, the gods, the holidays and calendar, the major NPCs elsewhere in the world, all of that stuff should be considered at this stage. But in other words, you don't yet need to build the world in the literal sense, because at this point in the game, your party just can't interact with it. So it doesn't matter yet. My main takeaway from this section was to create rumors about these faraway lands and people, but just little snippets to make it feel real without it feeling like something the party needs to go investigate anytime soon. Then, as you play and take note of what elements the party is interested in, you start building out those parts of the world, and I talk more about this style of prep in this video on your screen. So check out the Valakan Clans Kickstarter and share this video with your game group as a great way to support the channel. Thank you for your support, and keep building.